And in line with where the US State Department is going, it's interesting that last week the US State Department put out ads for college students in the United States to take up an internship in Sydney to promote the Australian alliance through social media to young people in Australia who were sceptical of the alliance. Just interesting. When we look at Australian public diplomacy, it's clear that the opportunities yet to be seized vastly outnumber the challenges that have been so far met. Just before the recent election, there was the announcement of Building Brand Australia, a $20 million program to provide an overarching strategic approach to positioning Australia in the global marketplace. But other than that, there's little that can be described as a global public diplomacy strategy, and certainly none that involves new and social media. 2009 report by the Lowy Institute noted that Australia's public diplomacy often takes the form of a disconnected series of activities, such as cultural events and trade expos, intended to cultivate favourable, if vague, impressions of Australia, and to promote the nation as an attractive destination to tourism, investment and migration, rather than to pursue specific international policy goals. Now, my view is that parallel with this would be a reformed approach to diplomacy, focusing on the development of language expertise with a view to long-term postings in countries to position diplomats as nodes of trust who engage with a much wider cross-section of the host populations than they do at the moment. In terms of broader public diplomacy activities, governments and militaries need to ensure that they have access to linguists and cultural experts in nominated areas who can, with fluency and knowledge, engage in debates on new media websites. We use language skills in this country for gathering intelligence, rather than the equally important challenge of exerting influence. And I find it incredible that after 9 years, finally, General Petraeus last week issued a directive that every soldier deployed to Afghanistan from the US had to have competence in Dari. It's a long time coming. Diplomatic missions should be seen in a totally different light, as resources that can use public diplomacy to connect directly with the citizens and influentials in their host countries, leaving the bilateral relationship to just a few officials. Diplomatic missions should also tap into public-private partnerships with a host of Australian private sector companies and organisations who have networks that are parallel and in some cases more credible than those of governments. A smart harnessing of present and retired executives to provide access to the human terrain of countries we wish to engage with would pay dividends. It would avoid the panic reactions when consular or other matters suddenly arise, such as accusations of racist attacks against Indian students in Melbourne in 2009. This is because the nodes of trust would already be in place to provide a balance in such debates. Governments and militaries should post staff overseas for periods that are long enough, perhaps up to 8 years, to enable them to master the languages and cultures of the countries to which they are sent. This would enable them to create enduring spheres of influence by establishing and strengthening networks of trust. Agencies need to look at creating clusters of experts in new media technologies, combined with subject matter specialists and strategic communicators who can be directed to any particular issue. These experts would work together through an intranet and need not be constrained by any geographic location. I would now like to turn to the Australian network, a $20 million taxpayer-sponsored international satellite channel currently run by the ABC and up for retender next year. There is a vigorous bid by the ABC, championed by its managing director, to recapture the tender as a spearhead for Australia's public diplomacy. There's an equally vigorous counter-challenge by Sky News to wrest the $20 million from Mr. Murdoch's coffers. Neither of the bidders has reflected on the changes we've talked about today, that satellite TV is an expensive hobby, which has already been overtaken by internet delivery, that successful international broadcasting is not about the English language or trumpeting and transmitting the country's message, but most successful programs are collaborative ones, transmitted in the target country's language and frequently hosted by the target country's presenters. BBC Worldwide has recognised this, They operate a television production business in Mumbai, producing local versions of programs. Now here's an alternative suggestion. For $20 million, you can produce 200 documentary programs of 50 minutes each. 200 hours worth of programming. How about setting up an expert panel of both Australian and regional eminent media executives to oversee this money? The panel would invite top documentary makers from relevant countries to come and make documentaries on Australia free of charge, on any subject, in their own regional languages, with no editorial censorship. They would be shot and edited by Australians, giving a much-needed shot in the arm to a flagging industry. Copyright would vest with Australia. These documentaries would then be aired in regional television channels in local languages because of the stature of the filmmakers. They would also be aired in English on an Australian intranet or internet TV channel. They would be an exemplar of our democracy and openness to scrutiny. The internet channel would then provide a multilingual forum for engaging with regional audiences, and we would truly accomplish the aims which Brand Australia has set out to do. India and China are already moving to take advantage of these opportunities in the region. If we do not follow with our own innovative approaches, Australia could end up being described as the planet Earth was described in the book The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and the description was mostly harmless.